Well, it's happening with relatively little notice, almost none, but the U.S.
Aw, thanks.
Start banking with Chime today at Chime.com.
Well, it's happening with relatively little notice, almost none, but the U.S. is quietly going broke, very quietly, but it's real. The Congressional Budget Office just released its forecast for next year's federal budget. Economists there are predicting a deficit of $897 billion. For perspective, that's about $120 billion more than last year, and it's far above the $500 billion deficits of the George W. Bush years that generated so much alarm at the time. You remember those? What we're running now is getting close to the trillion-dollar deficits of Obama's first term. The difference is those deficits came in the wake of the worst recession in decades, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, were still running at high intensity at the time. The national debt, most significantly at the time, was less than half of what it is right now. So why is all of this happening in 2019? It shouldn't be. They tell us our economy is in strong shape. Our leaders say that we're so rich we can give free health care to illegal aliens. No problem. These are boom times. But if that's true, then why aren't we running a surplus? The national debt is $22 trillion. That's bigger than our annual GDP. What do you think is going to happen if there's another market crash? Or if suddenly we have to fight another war, if the Democrats succeed in pushing us to war with Russia, for example? If we're this underwater during a peacetime boom, imagine what things could look like when something goes wrong, and it inevitably will. In life, something always goes wrong. And sometimes you can even predict what it's going to be. Interest rates, for example. Our current debt scheme works because long-term interest rates remain low. And yet, even now, our annual interest payments amount to more than $370 billion. That's about as much as our entire budget for Medicaid. Once interest rates go up, and they will, that figure will explode. At that point, your tax dollars won't go to roads or health care or SEAL Team 6. They'll just go to interest payments. And you'll get nothing in return for that. Only the bankers will benefit. Both parties ought to be very worried about this. Neither party seems to be. They assume they'll be long gone when the bill comes due. They'll be living in Florida. And that's usually right. But this time they're wrong. Because this isn't the long-term crisis we used to talk about. It's happening right now as we watch. Speaking of changes to the economy, California was once America's richest state. It was a mecca for middle-class Americans seeking good weather and a strong economy. Things have changed. How much? Well, let's see. There's a typhus outbreak in Los Angeles. It started in a homeless community that has transformed into an epidemic. It's spread by rats and fleas living on piles of trash in the streets of downtown Los Angeles. One city prosecutor in LA says that she contracted typhus from fleas living in her city hall office. That tells you a lot. Dr. Marc Siegel is our medical correspondent and a very good man, and he joins us tonight. Dr. Siegel, typhus doesn't sound like the kind of thing that we would have a problem with in this country.
You wouldn't think so, Tucker. Good evening. It's an ancient scourge, but we're seeing it in Los Angeles because there's 55,000 homeless in Los Angeles County alone because of the terrible housing crisis there. And to give you an idea what this is like, there are typhus zones, city blocks where 4,000 or more people live, where storm drains are used for human waste, where there's piles of garbage, rats roaming through the streets and over people who are on the city streets, spreading fleas, which then get in through cuts and bring typhus, which is a bacteria, into the body, and the homeless don't have any way to get it treated. There's no antibiotics. The solution would be getting rid of the rats, getting rid of the garbage, and find places for these people to live.
So this typhus is a disease that's spread through filth and disorganization, two things that we thought we'd conquered in this first world country of ours.
And rats, which have been around since the bubonic plague, spreading disease through fleas. Right. And to give you an idea how horrible this is, that City Hall official that you were talking about talked about a headache so severe it felt like railway ties were going through her head. She had a high fever, muscle aches, and a bad rash. Very, very bad disease. Now, we can treat it, but it's a terrible thing to be afflicted with. And again, it's spread because of garbage, rats, and fleas. All of things you would think Los Angeles could take care of. But of course, big business has left Los Angeles. They don't have anywhere for people to stay. And what's interesting about the homeless in Los Angeles, Tucker, is they don't have shelters to go to at night. You know, you would think, oh, beautiful weather. But when you're out on the streets and you have nowhere to use the bathroom and you're using a storm sewer, you end up spreading disease.
It's really it's unbelievable. Dr. Siegel, thank you very much for that.
Good to see you, Tucker.